Ever feel like you just want to get something important? Really understand a complex topic quickly without wading through tons of detail.
Yeah, I know that feeling. And that's pretty much our goal today.
Exactly. We're zooming in on a place that, well, looks pretty small on a map. Bodh Gaya in Bihar, India.
But don't let the size fool you. This one spot, its global impact has been absolutely monumental, a place with real, lasting significance.
Totally. And we've got quite a range of material here. History, archaeology, some modern takes too.
Right. The idea is to really pull out the core insights about Bodh Gaya for you, to show why this specific place means so much to so many people all over the world.
Yeah, we're not going for every single fact, but we want you to leave with a really solid grasp of why it's so enduringly important. Okay, let's dive in then.
Okay, so the absolute bedrock of Bodh Gaya's importance, it all comes down to one single event, a really transformative moment.
Right.
It's the place where Siddhartha Gautama, this was maybe the 6th century BCE, give or take, he achieved enlightenment.
Under the tree.
Under the tree, exactly. Meditating. And that tree, well, it became known as the Bodhi tree. That moment turned him into the Buddha.
And kicked off this whole huge spiritual and philosophical tradition.
Precisely. It touched, and still touches, countless lives.
And this wasn't just some fleeting thing. Its importance was recognized, really early on, wasn't it?
Oh, definitely. By the 3rd century BCE, you've got Emperor Ashoka, who was a massive figure in ancient India. He already built the first temple there to commemorate the site.
Wow, that early. And the temple we see today, the Mahabodhi Temple, it's pretty spectacular, I understand.
It really is. It towers 52 meters high, and these 4 incredible stone pillars just covered in detailed carvings. It's quite a sight.
And what's fascinating is who venerates it. It's not just Buddhists, right?
Not at all. I mean, yes, it's the most sacred place for Buddhists globally, no question, but it's also deeply revered by Jains and Hindus.
Which tells you something about the sort of interconnectedness of religious traditions in India over centuries.
Exactly. It speaks volumes. And UNESCO recognized that universal value, too. They made the Mahabodhi Temple a World Heritage Site back in 2002.
Under multiple criteria, I saw culture, history.
Right. Acknowledging its profound significance. Approved in 2003, technically.
Okay. Now, here's a really interesting part of the story. Despite being so important early on, Bodh Gaya kind of faded away for a while.
Yeah, that's right. It sort of fell off the map, historically speaking. Some accounts even say it was lost in time.
Lost in time.
It wasn't until much, much later, you're talking 19th, 20th centuries, with British restoration work and then serious historical and archaeological research, that its original significance was really brought back to light, moving it beyond just semi-legendary tales.
But that rediscovery in modern times, well, that brought its own issues, didn't it?
It certainly did. Fast forward to, say, 2003. The Archaeological Survey of India, the ASI, they announced these big plans. They wanted to conserve the temple, but also develop the area around it.
And that sparked a debate, I gather.
Oh, immediately. Widespread debate. It wasn't straightforward at all.
So who was on which side?
Well, you had Buddhist monks and, importantly, local residents who were voicing concerns, probably worried about, how it would change their daily lives, the atmosphere.
Yeah, the sacred feel of the place.
Exactly. And then on the other side, you had various foreign Buddhist organizations, tour operators. They were generally more supportive, seeing the potential for, more pilgrimage, more tourism.
And a big part of this was the buffer zone idea.
That was central. They proposed this 1-kilometer buffer zone right around the Mahabodhi Temple.
A whole kilometer.
Yeah. The idea, the stated intention, was protection, safeguarding the temple itself, its surroundings, its ambiance.
So what did that mean in practice?
It meant plans for managing how visitors moved around, putting in public utilities. But the big one was a ban on any new construction inside that zone.
Ah, okay. So intention is preservation, but I can see how that would make local residents nervous.
Absolutely, especially when it came to new laws about land governance, about who owns what. It really throws that classic dilemma into sharp relief, doesn't it?
Yeah, that tension between protecting a world treasure and respecting the people who actually live there.
Exactly that. And, to really get why Bodh Gaya is so significant, we kind of need to step back for a second. Look at the origins of Buddhism itself.
Right, the context.
It all started in northern India with Siddhartha Gautama, probably 5th or 6th century BCE, around that time.
And Buddha just means?
The enlightened one. And Buddhism is basically, the teachings of the enlightened one.
Simple enough. And his life story is usually seen in stages.
Yeah, often 3 key phases. First, he was a prince, living a sheltered life. Then he became a seeker, renouncing it all to find deeper truth. And finally, a teacher, sharing what he'd found.
And this was happening in a time when other major traditions were already present in India.
Oh yes, Vaishnavism, Saivism. These were well-established traditions. Buddhism emerged within that rich religious landscape.
Some people view the Buddha almost as a reformer of Hinduism.
That's a really insightful way to look at it. He definitely drew on the existing intellectual and spiritual heritage. But his big emphasis, the shift, was on the individual's own path, discovering truth for yourself.
Not just accepting tradition or authority.
Precisely. There's that powerful quote attributed to him, something like, "The wise man should search and discover what is true. Don't just accept it because you heard it or because it's tradition or scripture or even seems probable. Find it yourself."
That's a powerful message. So the Mahabodhi Temple, it's not just an old building, it's the pilgrimage site,
Yeah.
marking that exact spot of enlightenment.
Exactly. And it's also tied to the start of his teaching career because his first sermon was given later at Sarnath. It's all connected.
And the building itself, the architecture, it reflects this.
Absolutely. You see what scholars call Vedic motifs, design elements from earlier Indian traditions woven together with visual stories from the Buddha's life.
Its reputation is huge too, right? One of the 7 wonders of the world, apparently.
That label speaks volumes about its global cultural impact. Yeah, it's certainly seen that way by many.
And the sacredness isn't just the main temple building.
No, the whole complex is sacred. You've got the Bodhi tree itself, obviously, but also things like the Exobia stone and this sacred stream that's believed to come from deep within the earth.
But it hasn't always been peaceful. There have been conflicts.
Oh, definitely. Over the centuries, you see signs of, well, contestation.
Okay.
French inscriptions from ages ago, some mistaken claims linking it to Jainism, and now the pressures of modern commercialization.
Which really highlights why careful restoration is so vital.
Urgently needed, yes, to protect this incredibly valuable site.
Thinking more about that architecture,
Yeah.
it's all tied back to Sakyamuni Buddha, his life, his teachings.
Fundamentally, and the sources mention quite a range of structures there. You've got ancient ruins right alongside these grand stupas.
Those dome-shaped monuments.
Exactly, and temples too. Each piece tells part of the story, though they vary in style and age, of course.
And for people studying art or religion, there's something special about the really early stuff. The pre-Maggid remains.
Yeah, they're apparently quite unique architecturally, representing a distinct period in early Indian art and building. But Bodh Gaya's influence, it just radiates outwards, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It was central to Buddhism flourishing and spreading right across Asia.
You see it shaping art, culture, even politics in so many places.
Like those famous temples in Southeast Asia. Borobudur, Angkor Wat.
Exactly. Borobudur in Indonesia, Angkor Wat in Cambodia, Paharpur in Bangladesh. They're all testaments to how far Buddhist ideas and art traveled.
And it's interesting that even where Islam later became dominant, like parts of Southeast Asia.
Right, like the Malay Peninsula, Sumatra, Java. The sources mentioned there was still this interaction. Islamization wasn't entirely successful initially, and sometimes Islamic architecture even built upon existing Buddhist forms.
Fascinating. And Borobudur specifically, that's a major example.
Incredible example. Its whole design, those 3 levels, it's thought to represent both Javanese cosmology and the Mahayana Buddhist view of the universe.
Wow, a real blend.
A really sophisticated mix of local beliefs and Buddhist philosophy.
It's amazing how much Bodh Gaya features in the ancient Buddhist texts themselves.
Oh, extensively. Both the Pali Canon, which is like the foundational scripture collection for early Buddhism, and the later Mahayana texts, they talk about its significance all the time.
There's that story about the tree getting sick.
Yeah, it's in one of the sutras. The Bodhi tree apparently felt unwell when it heard a king was coming to visit.
Really? Why?
The Buddha's point in the story was to emphasize that Bodh Gaya was utterly unique, irreplaceable, the only place he attained enlightenment.
Right, there's that quote you mentioned.
Exactly. 50 years ago and more, in Gaya, after sitting under the pipal tree for 49 days, I realized the unconditioned Dharma. Has anyone ever traveled to see it? It was only here in Bodh Gaya that I was enlightened.
It really drives home how singular the place was seen to be.
Absolutely. And besides those core scriptures, you also find texts about the Buddha's life, about the idea of a pure land, like the Mahaparinirvana Sutra.
And inscriptions, too, though maybe rarer.
Yeah, stone inscriptions from the Tang and Jin dynasties in China mention Bodh Gaya, but apparently they're less common than other kinds of Buddhist texts from that era.
We also heard about this intriguing East Asian text, the strokes of Shakyamuni's disciple Zhuang.
Right. Described as a kind of diplomatic message, maybe? Compared a bit to the accounts of the famous Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang.
And it has a unique literary style in Tibetan Buddhism called manira.
Apparently so. And it's fascinating, isn't it, that even Tibetan texts specifically about Bodh Gaya seem less well preserved than some texts in Central Asian languages.
Suggests a really complex history of how information about the site traveled and survived.
Definitely. Different regions, different cultures, different ways of recording things.
So Bodh Gaya has this incredibly long history as a pilgrimage site, going back centuries.
At least to the 7th century, yeah. A long, unbroken tradition. And you can really see how that ongoing interaction between traditional pilgrimage and, well, modern tourism has shaped the town.
It was key for spreading Buddhism initially, but then its fame waned a bit.
It did. Its prominence fluctuated. But then centuries later, a Japanese monk rediscovers the Bodhi tree, and that really sparked international interest again.
And as pilgrims started returning in bigger numbers in the 20th century, tourism naturally followed.
Exactly. And you have organizations like the Bodh Gaya Temple Management Committee, the International Buddhist Council. They've played a big role in shaping the place physically.
Through those big projects, some controversial as we heard.
Right. And the government's view has shifted too. India really started focusing more on tourism after independence.
With the Ministry of Tourism set up in '86.
Yeah. And we even have accounts of these major closing ceremonies at the Mahabodhi Temple. The Dalai Lama was there.
Oh, wow.
And the tourism minister announced these huge plans for international development, big infrastructure projects.
Aiming for 1 million tourists a year. That's ambitious.
Very. Plans for a 1,000-room hotel, better connections to big cities. But, it has to be said, poor infrastructure has consistently been a drag on developing tourism, both in Bodh Gaya and Sarna.
Even with the plans, the reality on the ground is tough.
Mm-hmm. And the development plans often talk about creating this green, peaceful environment in Bodh Gaya, promoting Sarnath as a garden of spiritual wisdom.
But there's been pushback, too, like the golf resort protests.
Yeah, the Bodh Gaya Citizen Forum protested against plans for a golf resort, worries about, destroying the sacred character of the place.
So you see this tension in the branding, too, like the incredible India campaigns trying to balance the ancient past with modern appeal.
Exactly. Trying to attract global investment, maybe challenge some negative stereotypes about Bihar. But there are questions raised in the sources about whether local communities, especially poorer groups, are really involved in setting these big development agendas.
Feels like they might get marginalized sometimes.
That's the concern raised, yeah.
So Bodh Gaya is clearly this primary pilgrimage site in Bihar, all linked back to Siddhartha's enlightenment.
Absolutely. And the historical records found in the Gaya area itself, they give us really valuable clues about early Buddhist history. Plus, that UNESCO status just underlines its global significance.
And it's not static either. New temples are still being built, representing different Asian Buddhist traditions.
Right. It's a living site, constantly evolving, reflecting its importance to Buddhists worldwide. And as we said, it's also significant for Jains, Hindus, even followers of Sarvadharma.
That philosophy about the unity of religions.
Mm-hmm. And the visitor numbers are just huge.
Highest in the Buddhist circuit in India, you said.
Yeah, over 660,000 back in 2011, domestic and foreign combined. And uniquely for India's UNESCO sites, it gets more foreign tourists than domestic ones.
That is unusual. And the demographics are different, too. Foreign visitors tend to be younger.
On average, yeah. Compared to Indian visitors, who span a wider age range. The 2014-15 numbers give a breakdown to lots from South and East Asia, then Europe, North America.
And events there are often tailored for these pilgrims.
Often, yeah. Catering to a culturally aware audience.
Economically, Bodh Gaya is obviously massive. One of the 4 key Buddhist pilgrimage sites.
Absolutely. The cradle of Buddhism, they call it, because of that enlightenment event over 2 millennia ago. And the temple complex itself, ancient brickwork, sculptures, inscriptions, ruins. It's just layered with history.
And pilgrimage, there isn't just a solo thing. It's social. Sacred.
Brings people together from all sorts of backgrounds, and the way people do pilgrimage has evolved too, especially after the temple was formally consecrated back in 1882.
And different groups visit differently, like Buddhist groups from other countries versus Indian groups.
Yeah, they often visit separately, organized differently, but the significance of the pilgrimage itself is huge: cultural, social, spiritual, economic. The benefits ripple outwards.
It connects to rituals, traditions, the experience of the place itself.
Right. Temple-based tourism, cosmological ideas, ethics, it's all woven together. And ritual performance using space, time, your body, your senses, that's key.
And the local administration has a big job managing all this, especially after the UNESCO listing.
Huge job trying to maintain the site's integrity, its authenticity, while developing tourism in line with UNESCO guidelines. It's a balancing act.
Bodh Gaya is also a hub for major festivals, drawing huge crowds.
Absolutely. Buddha Jayanti, or Buddha Purnima, is massive, celebrated on the full moon in April.
That's the one Mahayana Buddhists focus on, believing his birth, enlightenment, and death all happened on the same lunar day.
That's the tradition, yeah. And the celebrations are incredible. Pilgrimages, markets, monks giving talks, rituals at the temple.
Like prayers, chanting, offering flowers.
Bathing the Bodhi tree, feeding monks and cows, religious dramas. The temple is lit up beautifully, and then there's midnight chanting.
In Pali and other languages.
Right. Pali for the Theravada tradition, other languages reflecting the Mahayana diversity. It's quite something.
And then there's Vesak in May or June.
Vesak, yeah. Also commemorating birth, enlightenment, and passing away. Bodh Gaya gets decorated with flags, lights.
And the water offering tradition.
Right, offering water to trees. It links back to Queen Maya at Buddha's birth in Lumbini, but here it focuses on watering the Bodhi tree. Thousands come for that week-long festival.
So the Buddha Jayanti rituals specifically include chanting suttas and pujas.
Offerings, observing the 5 precepts, the basic ethical code, decorating Buddha images, acts of giving, distributing food. It's very involved.
And Vesak, originating in Theravada Buddhism, has different names across Asia.
And it's a big deal culturally, even a public holiday in places like Sri Lanka. It's sometimes used to bring different groups together, too.
And at Bodh Gaya during Vesak.
Lots of lamps lit, decorations, food distribution, prayer flags, chanting with conch shells and bells, offering 8 symbolic items. Then that evening, candlelight vigil around the temple, Pali chanting.
Ending with a midnight recitation.
Yeah, led by the Sangha, the monastic community commemorating the unity of the Buddha's teachings, the Dhammas.
It's interesting how these festivals can take on national importance elsewhere, like you mentioned in Thailand.
Right, with state figures involved, promoting Bodh Gaya as the key location, perhaps subtly positioning it against India's historical claim in some ways.
So Bodh Gaya's status as the top Buddhist pilgrimage spot is pretty much undisputed.
Absolutely. The Mahabodhi temple complex, the tree, all the surrounding monasteries built by different groups. It's hugely significant.
Not just for Buddhists, but Hindus and Jains too. And you see the town reflecting that shops, temples, monks everywhere.
And that UNESCO World Heritage designation gives it that crucial international recognition and layer of protection.
Though there have been those contested claims, especially from some Hindu groups, about the temple's history and ownership.
Yes, that's part of its complex history, a re-envisioning of its narrative, as some sources put it.
And the preservation plans post-UNESCO, like the buffer zone, they're trying to balance things. Meditation, religious practice, tourism.
That's the aim. The proposed Museum of Buddhism, the archaeological parks within the zone, it's all part of that effort. But with that strict rule, existing structures okay, but no new ones.
Which, as we heard, led to some pushback. Different ideas about foreign rituals, commercialism, leading to protests like the one in 2005.
Right, the shopkeepers and landowners worried about the construction restrictions in that buffer zone.
So right after the UNESCO designation, officials made announcements about preservation and development.
Yeah, lots of plans outlined, focusing on both the meditation religious side and its potential as a major tourist draw.
And the plans were ambitious, re-excavating old ruins, restoring rivers, a huge Buddha statue.
And fixing the sewage system, which was clearly needed.
And that 1-kilometer buffer zone was key to defining areas for movement, the museum, parks, tourist facilities.
But always with that caveat, no new construction allowed inside it. That remained a major point of friction.
Leading to those 2005 protests.
After that, the ASI called for another meeting with UNESCO and other experts to really hash out the best preservation methods.
And there was this hopeful quote in a newspaper about ending suffering in Bodh Gaya through protecting the temple.
Yeah, reflecting that optimism that development done right could preserve the sacred site and benefit the community.
But the actual management plans took time. The ASI drafted them with input from various groups.
But the first draft got rejected by Buddhist groups, so they had to go back and frame a second plan. It wasn't a smooth process.
Bodh Gaya's path to UNESCO status was built on solid ground, though. All that historical archaeological evidence.
Stupas, temples, monasteries from different eras, Mauryan, medieval. And its crucial role in spreading Buddhism across Asia, that was key.
The Mahabodhi temple complex itself is seen as this monumental testament to the Buddha's enlightenment.
And a living pilgrimage site. Its unique atmosphere, that sense of tranquility, UNESCO specifically noted that as part of its value.
And Emperor Ashoka's visit back in 249 BCE, establishing that early shrine.
The presence of major stupa complexes, those 4 monolithic stone pillars, likely from Ashoka's time.
The one with the lotus and lion and wheel.
That's the one. Plus artifacts in the museum, like that terracotta plate possibly showing Bodhidharma.
And shrines to figures like Maitreya and Avalokiteshvara, reflecting Mahayana influences and maybe links to the Malay dynasty. It's all part of humanity's cultural heritage.
Absolutely. And that 2005 ASI meeting was vital for discussing how to protect all that, again, linking development to preservation. The UNESCO listing in 2002 really did transform Bodh Gaya pilgrimage site and major tourist destination.
Which brought the need for funding for things like housing and infrastructure into focus.
Right. Though the first master plan, relying heavily on regulation and prohibition, was seen by some locals as potentially creating problems, a socio-political vacuum even.
And the buffer zone aimed to control construction, designate areas for parks, recreation, tourist facilities.
But strictly limited new tourism or business construction. Existing places like hotels and schools would be monitored. The rejection of that first plan shows just how tricky managing such a site is.
Bodh Gaya's influence on culture and art across Asia is just profound, isn't it?
You see it everywhere, in the stupas, the chaityas, those prayer halls, the viharas, the monastic residences, built over centuries.
And the quality of the art itself, the monuments, sculptures.
Often considered exceptional, surpassing other styles, some sources say, imbued with this real spirit and grandeur.
And they hold relics, drawing huge numbers of pilgrims every year.
Hundreds of thousands, and there might have been an ancient school there, maybe one of the earliest learning centers.
Which grew into a famous university under Ashoka.
That's the suggestion? Attracting artists, sculptors, architects, building monasteries, stupas, inviting famous monks.
And relics even arrived from other places, like Bodhi tree relics from Odisha and Sri Lanka.
And mentions of huge structures being built, like that giant bowl over 80 feet high. Bodh Gaya became this hub for monks, and an old Mahayana sect was founded there.
So the art and architecture really mirror the spread and influence of Buddhism itself.
Exactly. Temples, stupas built with imperial support after the Dhamma, the teachings spread.
And the Mahabodhi Mahavihara temple is special because it's relatively intact.
One of only 4, apparently, that are almost complete and unchanged with specific symbolic designs.
It's interesting how Buddhism developed philosophically in India, but maybe stayed more static as a national religion elsewhere?
Generally speaking, yeah. Though you do get important new schools like Zen Buddhism emerging in Japan, for instance, but those ancient Buddhist sculptures from India...
Still considered among the finest.
Absolutely. Inspiring awe even today. The skill of the Indian sculptors in creating these exquisite human forms...
Reflecting divine grace, inner beauty.
Achieved through these sleek lines, detailed carvings. And the sculptures at Mahabodhi depict everything Buddha's life. Jataka tales of past lives, bodhisattvas, Vajrayana symbols.
So Bodh Gaya wasn't just about art. It was pivotal for Buddhism becoming a world religion and for its literary and philosophical contributions too.
Hugely significant. The collection of Buddha's discourses led to the Pali Canon, the Tripitaka, and the Agamas.
And later, scholars wrote major philosophical works in Sanskrit.
Right, from the 2nd century CE onwards, engaging with and sometimes challenging the Brahmanic systems, leading to influential schools of thought like Nyaya and Vedanta within the broader Indian context.
And distinct Buddhist philosophical systems like Visaptimitrata and Madhyamaka developed too.
Based on the Pali Canon, yeah. And they became hugely influential in East Asia, thanks to commentators like Vasubandhu and Dharmakirti figures revered as bodhisattvas.
The sheer number of Sanskrit Buddhist texts was vast.
Over 100,000, containing really profound thought. Tragically, so many were lost.
In those fires started by invaders in the 12th century, after flourishing at places like Nalanda.
Exactly, a devastating loss of knowledge.
Going back to those closing ceremonies at Mahabodhi Temple, with the Dalai Lama and the tourism minister announcing big plans.
Right, developing Bodh Gaya as an international destination, improving infrastructure, hotels, roads, trains, aiming for that 1 million tourists a year figure.
The minister thanked UNESCO, envisioned this whole circuit, World Heritage, archaeological, Buddhist tourism.
But again, acknowledging that poor infrastructure was a major hurdle.
And there was opposition to some plans, like resorts near the Bodhi tree, Buddhism's Sanctum Sangram was one headline.
Yeah, highlighting the conflict, portraying Bodh Gaya and the tree as ancient, needing preservation. Someone quoted saying, "Let us preserve it, otherwise it won't be good for our future."
And specific protests against a golf resort.
The Buddhist community, the Bodh Gaya Citizen Forum, worried about destroying Buddhist heritage.
So as India promotes Bodh Gaya internationally, you get these analyses of the socio-political side effects of things like a golf resort.
And this push towards modernization, sanitation in Bahar's development plans.
And that careful packaging of Bodh Gaya's image, mixing modernity with the Buddhist past, like Bhutan's Land of Happiness branding.
Right, but warnings, too, about tampering with the timelessness of a holy place, about globalization potentially desecrating beliefs.
And using Bodh Gaya's peaceful image to attract global capital, brand the new Bihar via Incredible India, counter negative stereotypes.
It's complex. And remember those contradictory statements from officials after the UNESCO listing, one saying development would end suffering,
while another called the area around the temple an illegal start of a sacred place, conducive to suffering.
Exactly. Highlighting different perspectives even among officials. But the focus remained on meditation, religious aspects, and tourist attractions in the development projects.
With acknowledgement of past destruction and a renewed urgency for protection.
And ideas about restricting pilgrim access for better management, even that abandoned idea of a glass barrier over the temple.
Showing that conflict between protection and promotion, affecting residents and those concerned about security and sacredness.
And the 1-kilometer buffer zone proposal again, with plans for movement areas, the museum, tourist facilities, but no new construction.
Leading to controversies over foreign rituals, commercialism, and those 2005 protests against the restrictions. Local newspapers covered it.
And all this happens against the backdrop of a rapidly growing global tourism industry.
Driven by better living standards, more demand for leisure.
Right. Defined by the WTO as travel outside your usual environment. And technology has been a huge driver.
Telecoms for virtual visits, new transport expanding travel, IT for booking, info.
Exactly. Computer skills boost productivity in tourism reservations, ticketing. Though monopolies like the old Sabre airline system could sometimes limit those gains.
And the next frontier is better systems for order entry, scheduling, information brokering, inventory control.
So Bodh Gaya's UNESCO status recognizes the Mahabodhi Temple as this prime example of a 6th century multi-tiered shrine. Continued integration as a World Heritage Site is vital.
One of the earliest stone temples, still a living monument for Buddhists and Hindus, historically significant for both.
And those post-UNESCO development plans, the district commissioner wanting a beautiful agraharam welcoming to both Hindus and Buddhists.
But those plans raise local concerns about land laws, sacredness.
And the buffer zone, potentially restricting pilgrim access despite maintaining important shrines, plus the ban on new structures, even temporary ones.
Leading back to those conflicting visions, foreign rituals versus local commerce, and the 2005 protests by shopkeepers fearing for their livelihoods, descendants of temple figures expressing concern.
Bodh Gaya also became this magnet for Buddhist monks and scholars globally.
Leading to new educational institutions.
Exactly, meeting that growing demand for Buddhist studies. A meeting in 1989 led to a Buddhist institute starting with primary schools.
Then the Institute of Buddhist Studies in Gaya in '91.
Right, with 4 specializations. It later got affiliated with a university, moved to the largest Tibetan monastery in Bodh Gaya in '99, and became the Buddhist Studies Program, or BSP, offering learning and research for monks and lay scholars.
And other academies followed, like the Prajnaparamita International Academy, the Tibetan Learning Institute.
Yeah, Prajnaparamita in 2015 offering PhDs, the Tibetan Institute in 2009 focusing on language and literature for monks, plus the Bodh Gaya Mahabodhi International College for undergraduate courses.
So there's this real growth of expertise on Buddhism centered in Bodh Gaya now.
Contributing to deeper understanding, preserving and promoting the teachings through training. And of course, Buddhism itself is a major world religion, with Western interest boosted by the Dalai Lama.
But defining Buddhism isn't simple, is it? You need the socio-historical context.
Absolutely. Just labeling it religion or philosophy or culture can be too narrow, often influenced by Eurocentric ideas. Though those categories aren't entirely foreign to Buddhist traditions themselves.
But those Western perceptions became dominant during the colonial period.
And that shaped Buddhist studies, often leading to a narrow focus on certain texts, like the canon, sometimes ignoring unpublished manuscripts or other evidence.
So the argument is that Buddhist studies programs haven't always used the widest possible lens, staying focused on narrow historical contexts and a narrow definition of normative texts.
That's a critique raised in the sources, yeah. And international collaborations can sometimes be split by geography or discipline, anthropology, religious studies, archaeology.
But they often converge when discussing the significance of places or practices.
Exactly. And Bodh Gaya is a primary site for analyzing that contemporary significance, and it features heavily in heritage site descriptions, too.
So you find publications looking at Bodh Gaya from all angles: archaeology, modern pilgrimage, even treaties between India and Myanmar.
Right. Compilations focusing on pilgrimage and Sarnath and Bodh Gaya, looking at sacred places, pilgrim practices, different traditions, anthropological views, history, custodianship.
Including the impact of the UNESCO tag, potential threats, broader ideas of sacredness, interactions with other religions.
Ethnographic accounts of current pilgrimage, visits by Chinese pilgrims. It's a rich field.
And that UNESCO approval in 2002 definitely brought more scrutiny from experts.
Followed by those official announcements about preservation and development aimed at ending suffering.
With the state wanting to promote it mainly as a religious site for meditation, maybe limiting tourist accommodation in the buffer zone.
Yeah, and groups like the BTMC and some monastics agreed, questioning the speed of commercial growth.
Again, that conflict between conservation and tourism, impacting residents and those who see it as deeply sacred.
And the buffer zone process for UNESCO guidelines being described as rancorous, with computerized maps showing land boundaries.
Strong opposition from locals who knew the area but not the specific plan, arguing maybe only 10% needed WHS designation.
Right. And while existing structures were okay, the plan said no new ones except wells and toilets, plus the ongoing controversies over rituals and commercialism.
Leading to that 2005 protest against the master plan, echoing buffer zone conflicts. People upset about their land being called vacant.
And shopkeepers specifically worried about losing their livelihoods, bans on selling things like Varanasi lamps or Sarnath Buddha statues.
Bodh Gaya remains this major pilgrimage site for diverse Buddhist countries and sects, with unique architecture, monuments, the Mahabodhi temple within that 30-foot wall.
Its authenticity is considered international level, and good planning, management, landscape preservation, involving local and technical experts, that's crucial for its exceptional aspects.
The values are managed, rules are enacted for daily operations.
Which benefits sustainable tourism, living culture conservation, preserving the legacy, local pride, when implemented precisely.
And the inscribed WHS components include the main temple, monasteries, archaeological park, green landscape.
Right. That 6 evaluation criterion looked at the complex's structure, compared it to other potential sites. The landscape has potential as a historic urban landscape, too.
But sustainable practices seem maybe mixed or less implemented sometimes. Beautification efforts maybe not fully considering the WHS aspect.
That observation is noted, and Buddhism historically valued wildlife conservation for spiritual progress.
Leading to diverse flora and fauna.
Exactly. Studies have listed plant and algae species, inventoried flowering plants, ferns, resulting in a comprehensive flora account for the area.
Lots of interesting trees, shrubs, herbs, climbers, some edible or useful for oil, and the sacred pipal trees, of course.
The flora resembles the Gangetic plains, with Leguminosae and Compositae families being prominent, and lots of medicinal plants, some commonly used.
So Bodh Gaya is one of the foremost sacred sites, home to Mahabodhi temple, rich heritage. But this problem of reconciling sacredness and heritage seems current.
Post-UNESCO plans aimed for a tourist-friendly, holy place, focusing on meditation, religious, and tourist aspects.
But that conservation versus tourism conflict impacts residents and the spiritually connected.
And the buffer zone aimed to limit new construction, define areas for movement and facilities, meeting UNESCO guidelines.
With conflicting visions, pilgrims rejecting blocked views versus officials prioritizing heritage.
And controversies over foreign rituals, commercialism, leading to the 2005 protests.
Bodh Gaya sits on the Falgu River. The temple is impressive, architecturally significant early brickwork, inscriptions showing reverence.
And that 33.62 hectare area designated by UNESCO in 2002. Post-independence conservation efforts by various groups sometimes altered the site's functions.
Urban encroachment impacting aesthetics, tensions among devotees over changing identities.
Leading to protests emphasizing cultural heritage claims. Legislation has protected the temple since the 50s, the Ancient Monuments Act, state laws, other acts covering archaeology, environment, WHS schemes.
But WHS status brings challenges: cultural erosion from visitor numbers, commercialization. And with no central Buddhist Orthodox institution, you get discrepancies in cultural adaptation.
Historically, those 300 paintings of Buddha and the tree were lost. Stone carvings, flutings, lotus brackets damaged or obscured, secondary shrines gone, renowned artworks damaged, hidden, or lost like first millennium sculptures.
Preserving what's left is crucial for the temple and its WHS status.
The richest heritage now is bronze sculptures, but they're damaged, microfied, some disappearing. And questions about custodianship, surreptitious deviation, degradation by monks from other schools undermining orthodoxy.
And monastic impersonators drawn by Westerners seeking occult powers.
That's mentioned, contributing to a neighboring temple becoming huge. And the contradiction of Tibetan Mahayana monks often becoming custodians, leading ceremonies, maybe displacing older monasteries to get holy soil, driven by dreamful pragmatism.
A contrast between past aura and present temples with shining marbles, but maybe less credence.
That's one perspective offered. The WHS process involved the concept note in 2005, expert visit in 2007, dossier in 2008.
Mission report in 2008, workshop in 2009 to strategize management plan implementation with ongoing updates.
The site inscribed in 2002 for cultural significance includes the temple complex, pond, tree, Gupta ruins, mound, remnants within 4.86 acres.
The management plan, 2004, approved 2006, and impact assessment aimed for protection.
Ongoing efforts to evict encroachments, limit modern institution impact, manage traffic according to the plan covering conservation, power, water, transport limits, better facilities, trying to regulate modern construction despite land ownership issues.
The 2010 Tokyo meeting emphasized the Buddhist aspect. Japan funded restoration. India has contributed significantly since WHS status, foreign aid expected.
Tourism infrastructure has potential despite issues. Lots of international hotels, decent water recycling, though freshwater delivery is inconsistent.
But the need to develop pilgrimage routes connecting sites inside and outside the buffer zone remains unaddressed.
And pilgrim tourists have diverse motives. Sharing a pilgrimage idea may be similar to Jain's, based on belief in a person's influence. Sarnath seems stronger in pilgrimage now, Bodh Gaya may be lagging.
Repeated talk of promoting tourism, but bureaucracy hinders concepts. That interface between cultural site and religious pilgrimage is a major unexplored issue for Buddhism and tourism.
Yeah, how is Buddhism tourism received in Bodh Gaya as this rural national WHS? Global marketing changes meanings of sacredness, pilgrimage, pre-colonial Golden Age ideas framed by benevolent rule in Hindi narratives.
Contrasting tourists taking photos with monastic lives continuing amidst ruins. Growing divergences beyond local religious imperial realms. Worries about secularization impacting the trees, the complex's way of life.
But similar views among Buddhism tourism purchasers globally regarding stakeholder ethnicity and development plans. Despite different Buddhist planning styles, Bodh Gaya has been constructed as the site of Buddhist origin recently.
Influenced by transnational and state efforts, informing pious pilgrimages. Attempts to center Bodh Gaya in Buddhism's past, present, future, after colonialism and secular India's creation.
Positioning Mahabodhi Temple as the centerpiece, maybe subtracting local history, making it an arena for universalism. The Mahabodhi Society's Pan-Asian founding, the Bell Collection key to this universalization.
So reading the temple's transnational value and pilgrimage as universalizing that Pan-Asianism, Buddhism's post-colonialism linked to Indian exceptionalism about Buddhism and state formation.
A shift from emphasizing Bodh Gaya's South Asianness during its recovery to its belonging to a broader Buddhist world, using cultural history to maybe shield exclusions, changing forms of belonging, potential dangers, claiming shifts from spiritual to ethnic belonging.
Heritage valuation, using Buddhist modernist texts against and imitating colonial views, doesn't preclude older colonial valuations persisting. Bodh Gaya's gradual apartness, treated as ancestor and excrescence, limiting its heritage value and that of its Sanskrit tradition, inscribed and ineligible, immortalized and shuttered. So, to wrap up, Bodh Gaya is this incredibly revered, sacred pilgrimage site, nearly 2,500 years of history. Central to Buddhism enlightenment, first sermon nearby, first nuns ordained in Bihar.
The Mahabodhi Temple absolutely deserves its UNESCO World Heritage status. For its own sake, for worshippers, ensuring its preservation for everyone as part of humanity's heritage. It is the most sacred shrine representing Buddha's enlightenment.
And Bodh Gaya means the village, the wider area, and the shrine itself, the Bodhi tree, west of the Niranjana River, south of Patna. Easily accessible by train or plane to Gaya or Patna.
The temple scene changes, but retains its ancient core, a focus for many faiths. But yeah, always good to critically evaluate claims of authenticity. Mahabodhi isn't just the place, it's enlightenment itself, the blossoming of insight.
Originally a monastic center, temples, lodges, gardens, shrines, mostly gone or replaced by concrete now. Maybe not a place of asylum like Sarnath, but pilgrimage has always been vital.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, we've truly seen how Bodh Gaya stands as the very cradle of Buddhism, the site of a profound spiritual awakening that has indelibly shaped the beliefs and practices of countless individuals across millennia.
The magnificent Mahabodhi Temple, with its towering presence and the sacred Bodhi tree, remains a central point of global pilgrimage and deep reverence. But as we've explored in detail, Bodh Gaya is also a living site, currently navigating the complex and often challenging intersection of preserving its ancient heritage.
Yeah, in the face of modern development and increasing global tourism, it's a real balancing act.
And its profound influence extends far beyond its physical location, doesn't it? Resonating in the art, architecture, philosophical traditions, and enduring spiritual practices of Buddhist communities worldwide.
Absolutely. This seemingly small village is truly a remarkable nexus point where the threads of history, religion, culture, and the dynamic forces of modernity all powerfully converge. It's quite something.
And on that thought, here's something for you, the listener, to ponder. How does this intricate interplay, this tension, really, between safeguarding a sacred past and embracing a modern future manifest in other significant historical and spiritual sites around the globe?
That's a great question. It really invites further reflection and exploration beyond just Bodh Gaya. Makes you think.